Welcome back to Inside History on board Battleship Massachusetts. Today we're going to be going over the upper handling rooms. These are for the 5-inch 38 Mark 28 guns. Massachusetts has on board 10 mounts similar to this one. They're all basically the same. A little bit on the exterior due to the location on the ship, but essentially the same thing. We're going to go into the handling here from the lower magazines using the dredge hoist and the ammunition setup going up into the mount. All right, so when the ammunition, as you saw in the previous series, comes up, it comes up through here. This is the dredge hoist. Comes all the way up from the lower magazines. The lower magazine serves 2 mounts. So it'd be this one and the next one forward for this side of the ship. We're on the port side right now. So the dredge hoists you have here, one is set up for projectiles, one is set up for powder. Now the projectile hoist, as you see, we have one in here. It's coming up through the hoist as part of the display, so that way you could see. Now this goes down about 4 decks, down to just above the engine room into the lower magazine, and they come up in cycles. Now what you see here is the 5-inch projectile, and on top, this is a fuse cap. Now all your projectiles would normally have these except for these, because these fuses are just dead fuses. They're what's called BLMP, blind loaded and plugged. They're for training purposes for firing. They have no explosive weight on them. They have no fuse, no base set fuse, just so they can be fired for training purposes. So that way you can range out, the fire controlman can range out as well and get the idea of what they're doing and how to do it without wasting expensive ammunition, because all this is sand and steel. Price, big difference. So these fuse caps would come up, they would be on the projectile to protect it from being banged around, because mechanical fuses, point det fuses, VT fuses, all these variable time fuse, point det, they're susceptible to shock damage. So when you're handling this 55-pound projectile, you don't want to bang the fuse and damage it, because it makes it inoperative, or you may accidentally have fun with it. So you want to protect it. So as it comes up, you'd have a group of people here working, and this is set up right now where the gun is facing outboard. So this general area here is where the projectiles would be going into, because you're not going to be pointing that way into the ship. So it's strategically set up to make the least amount of movement to get the ammunition from here to there. This is just a ready service room. If you were to go initially into action, this is where you would draw your ammunition first. But once this ammunition is petted out, now you have to start relying on the ammunition coming from below, and in a combat situation, you're trying to get the ammunition out to your target as fast as possible. For 22 rounds a minute, which this gun is rated up to, it's a very difficult thing to maintain, because you got to think how fast people have to move. In the operating of this mount and magazine, there are 22 men. So you'd have them down here handling powder and projectiles, loading for 2 guns. There's 2 hoists here. As a cup, it's a circular, so it's a cup that when you put it in, comes up, the cup comes back down, cycles around, and you're bringing up projectiles and sending them up to the gun. So you're constantly feeding. You're feeding, and the projectile is 55 pounds. So this is the dredge hoist for this side. Then you have to switch over to the powder hoist, which is right over here. Alrighty, so we've covered the projectile dredge hoist. Now we come over to the powder tank. Now if you see here, we've got a powder can coming up. This is your typical powder can for the 5-inch 38. If you notice, the color is gold. Gold is a newer color code for training. This is strictly a dummy type ammunition. So it's training marked gold, has no explosive weight, set up for the purpose, simply training. So it can never be confused, and you never have any accident. You actually learn the hard way. Normally, safety regulations and safety procedures in the Navy with ammunition, as well as everything else, these lessons are learned in blood. Somebody has either died or hurt for some reason for this to be either colored or done a certain way. So it's unfortunately from experience that you learn the hard way. And that was one of them, because you don't want to mix up and put live ammunition back into a gold can. So that's why we keep them gold. So the can comes up like this from the dredge hoist. The tank, it's actually called, contains the can in it. Right, that protects it from getting damaged, dented, and or exposed to spark or inadvertent striking. So what you have are tank wrenches here on the side. So as this comes up, if you can't manually turn it, okay, say you had to do that and was stuck, grab your tank wrench, put it on here, pop it, pull off the top. Now as you see, cardboard came out. Now this is what we call dunnage. This spacer is put in here to prevent the can from getting shock damage from moving around. So a lot of the powder cans have that to prevent that from happening. This stuff gets tossed out because it is combustible material. So when you see on signs and you go buy Ships magazine or something, remove all dunnage, spark producing items, this is what they're talking about. If it's no longer in use, it's trash. Usually you just put them in an empty can aside, poof, get rid of it later. But in the heat of battle, you probably just throw it aside, poof, out of the way, continue with the mission of live fire and exercise. So as you can see, as the can comes up, take the top off, take the can out, somebody would hold it, take it out, and here's your trainer for your powder can. This is about 30 pounds. All right, this has a rubber bead on it, and in the bottom of the casing, which is brass, there's looks like a screw here. This would be where the primer would normally be. All right, so this has to go up inside the hoist, upside down. So that way, when it comes up through the hoist, somebody is pulling it out and dumping it into the tray of the gun, pointing that way. And we'll look at that when we go look up at the gun. Gun is expensive. We'll get into that later and the meanings of that. All right, so when the can comes up, what do you do with the can after you take the powder can out, which is, step over here. This is light because it's empty. So your powder can, your can itself, not your tank, comes out when you take it out. Then you have to bring it over to the powder hoist, put it in, and push it through the shuttered doors to lock it in. Once that's done, what do you do with the can? Can't use it. So the can comes out, the empty can. Right below me is a chute, goes to another space, usually an office or whatever the space below would be used for. Be cleared out because you got the can in, drop the chute door, the empty can gets out of the way because it's a trip hazard. So during battle, the can comes out, powder's out, empty tank is cleared, send it down below, get it out of the way. So you got somebody down there who's also kicking the cans away, they don't pile up and jam or cause damage. So with that, the powder can comes over, inserted into the hoist, pushed in. Key thing is, a lot of old-time gunners mates you'll see when they're handling ammunition over the years, they can get careless. They're missing tips of their fingers so they get caught in hoist or up in the breech area. It operates that fast. So the good rule of thumb for safety is curl your hands, bump it in with the palm of your hand. Bump it in, pull out quick, and you keep all your expenditures. You don't want to keep all the fingers. So when you see an old-time gunner's mate, sometimes they're missing the tips of their fingers. It happened. But safety, you learn the hard way. That's why lessons in blood. So, as you can see now, we've covered the dredge hoists for the powder magazine and the projectile. Now when the ammunition comes up, if you have time and you want to restock your bins, these racks over here would be for your powder. And your cans would be stacked and interlocked in so that way they wouldn't be moving around, and you'd be using what's called battens to hold them in. So everything's braced up, so motion and see, you don't have any noise, you don't have any shifting of ammunition. They're all designed to interlock and sit inside these bins. That's the powder cans. You got one over there, one over here. Like I said, at 22 rounds a minute, you burn through these in like 2 minutes. So that's why once combat action starts, you usually have a ready service mount, standing a condition of readiness watch. So you'd have a few gun mounts ready to go, manned up. So that way you'd have time to react in a combat situation. That's why you hear about combat steaming. You're standing up your ship for actual combat action that could happen at any moment. So you have watches standing. So you have half the ship's ammunition set to go with people and the gun mounts set to go. Condition 3 steaming, as it would be called. So condition 1 being general quarters. Now that you have all this set up, you have your ammunition set, you have your 5-inch, this is your lower hoist in the mount. All right, we shifted over here so you can actually see the lower hoist to the gun mount itself. Now these two are set up to left and right gun. So the gun is usually facing this way in this setup with the projectiles on this side. Your projectile hoists here going up to the mount with your left and right gun. In the back, the same thing for the powder. Those arch up and to the back of the mount because your projectile goes forward of the powder. So when we get up into the mount, we'll show you how all that comes into alignment. But down here, your projectiles come up in the hoist right here, and the projectile gets put into the hoist. Now, what you have here is a fuse cup, because if you have a mechanical fuse, either VT or a point bed fuse with a timing set, the projectile will be picked up, thrown in, and pushed in, door will be shut, and this one's latched open for display, but we'll leave it there. When it latches up, it shoots up. They take it out from the hoist, it drops into the loader's hand, he dumps it into the gun. You'll see that later when we go into the mount itself. So you got 1 and 2 guns, left and right. All right. So they go up, cycle down. Next one, boom, offset, one to the other, one to the other. Because you got to remember, you're doing 22 rounds a minute. So that ammunition usually comes out from the bins behind me. Now these are your ready service bins here as well for your projectiles. This should be your standard common projectiles, high explosives, armor piercing, AA common. We'll get into that a little bit later. So these bins, they're stacked up as you can see. Pointing out, the base is back against the bulkhead. Now these little barriers here are battens. Okay, they're locked in place to hold in the ammunition. That way, nothing. This is going to be a pain. Why don't you want to go in? Because it's probably this side. There it is. So you stack these up in here when the bin is full. When you start taking them out, so you can access the lower ones, and you're feeding this as much as possible. You don't have as much powder you try to have the right amount of powder and projectiles ready here until that starts coming up. Then you can switch to feeding that. You also have stand-up stowage over here. As you can see, again, these are BLMP, blind, loaded, and plugged, for training. They're 5-inch. They're able to be shot because they have the rotating band on the projectile. If these were true dummy projectiles, there'd be no rotating band because they'd be used in a loading machine out there, so that way it wouldn't get hung up in the rifling. But the weight is basically the same for training. The blue is for training purposes, but fireable. In this particular racks, you would have star shells or white phosphorus, which is it's considered an illuminating round. It's an original design, but it also has the properties of being an incendiary. as well. They used it for marking targets because it would incinerate everything around it, causing white smoke, and being used as a visual aid for targeting for the gunnery and the fire controlmen. But they have canisters in them. They're susceptible to damage. You need them in a really tight, locked up stowage so they don't get damaged or bumped into, which would activate the white phosphorus, which it's a bad situation. It's a chemical fire that it causes, and not a good thing. So you want to keep them safe, and again, you learn from experience. The racks are designed to hold them. And you also have star shells, which are another form of illumination when this contains a flare. You shoot that behind your target, so that way it would illuminate and silhouette your target, so you could see it at night. And once it's silhouetted, you can start doing your ranging and hitting your target you can see. So we'll look at that type of ammunition later down below in another series. You also have a couple of can storage here. These are probably racks would be for short charges. That's in case you have a misfire. You have to pull out your powder can, and you didn't get to shoot the gun. If you're not going to use a full cartridge, you'd use what's called a shorter clearing round, and that would usually be a couple of cans down here. That would be after effect, when we just have to make the safe gun, because if you have a live projectile in there, you don't want to leave it in there to cook off. If you can, you use a regular standard powder can, full charge. But if you're in a tight area, you couldn't use a full service charge and clear to a safe distance, use a short charge. Just knocks out a couple of miles, 1 or 2 miles, just enough to get pressure to get it out the barrel. So these storages would be for your short charges here. So this is the storage here for the upper handling room, direct ready service to the gun mount. Now, also in here, you got to remember that people are going to be stuck in here for hours on end. So you'll also have to have communication. Now, you have sound-powered phone setups in here, when you saw earlier. Those will be able to communicate to the magazine or to fire control plot. And hopefully you'll have the other circuits set up in conjunction with this at the switchboard, so you could communicate with the other magazines. You're also stuck in here for a while. You have potable water. You'd have water jugs in here, because you're on station for a long period of time, and even standing watch. So you'd have a supply of fresh water, and unfortunately, when you got to do a bathroom break, you got to go, but you try to rotate people in and out of that. It's a human thing. But you're stuck in here. You also have a first aid kit set up here, a sand bucket for any problems, and the white phosphorus, that's it. You'd have a water tank that you can dump the white phosphorus in. So you can either have, if you had white phosphorus up here, you could have your water can in here for immersing the powder can. Because the only way to stop a white phosphorus round if it gets damaged and the chemicals start to react is to immerse it in water to neutralize the chemical reaction. So you'd have a water can set up for that. So white phosphorus or star shells in this rack. And basically, that is the lower handling room. We can also look at a couple of things to look up in the mechanisms here in the gun mount. Something I want to point out to people, that this question has come out when you look at a gun, and what keeps that gun locked in place. Right? American guns were designed so that in heavy rolls, if the gun mount, its weight, it rolls on a bearing track. Now, if it heavy seas, you're moving thousands of tons of steel, and gravity takes effect, and the gun mounts can jump and bounce on the bearings. That damages and flattens the bearings, so it doesn't give you a good rolling path. So the way they came up with it, these brackets here, they're guided. If you look up in here, they're set and braced. They're just grips that come underneath the ring. So as the ship moves, rocks, and rolls, gravity's going to shift the mount a little bit. Instead of pounding on the bearings, these gripes help keep the mount locked in place. So as this mount turns around, these gripes hold in, and they also protect the bearings as well as the gears. So the gears for that, which the motor runs on, are right here. This is the pinion gear that trains the gun. from the motor above inside. This runs around the teeth, all the way around the rotating ring on the inside. So that is your motor drive. That's the gear. You got your grites that hold down the mount from going over. So if this ship actually turns over, if you ever saw the battle dams from Pearl Harbor when they rolled back over the Oklahoma, her gun mounts and turrets were still in place. That's why those kept those locked in. The Germans and Japanese designs Axis did not have that ability. So when their ships capsized, if you ever saw the Bismarck video or when they dive on the wrecks, they find the turrets are falling out because they didn't have that griping system locked in. It was that extra weight that they didn't think was necessary, but that actually protects the roller bearings and from damage to the ship movement and shifting of weight inside. So it's a bit of an American design. And these pistons here that you see, these are buffer pistons. If you follow around, you'll see there's stops. These are mechanical stops. So if the gun mount comes all the way over, it can rotate to a certain point, and these buffers will stop. There's actually a piston inside. So if the gun overruns, it doesn't run into the ship's structure or shoot into the ship's structure. These mechanical buffers help stop the mount from going there. It's all part of the system that makes up the gun mounts. There's so much stuff designed and built in to prevent damage to your own ship or to the system. So this is one of numerous things that you can see when you look up. So if you ever get into a museum ship, you look around, you can actually start picking out things. It's all part of the gunner's mate trade. We have to learn all this to actually make a functional mount and be aware of what it can and cannot do. Know your limitations. So that's all part of the system here for the 5-inch 38 down below that we can show you for right now. And we'll eventually get up inside the gun mount and we'll go over the details. What's the difference between the South Dakota-class gun mounts and the Iowa-class, because there is a slight difference between the two. Not much, but essentially the same thing. But we'll show you a few things up there when we get there. That basically covers the whole area here inside the upper Ready Service magazine on the Massachusetts. I'm Tom Lowney, GM1, retired U.S. Navy. Again, this is the Ready Service magazine for the 5-inch 38. I want to thank you for your time. I want you to remind you that I want you to like, share, and subscribe to the Battleship Cove page. And if you want to get involved in volunteering on board here, contact the ship. Details are linked to the page. And we can see about helping you, because it takes a lot of work to keep these ships in visual acuity of clean, painted, so that way you can enjoy them, because this is part of your history. We like to show it off and take pride. And thank you for your time. Have a good day. Take care.